there are a few that believe they're separate statements. Gill, the Cambridge Bible, and the Pulpit Commentary. I'm not exactly sure who wrote the Pulpit Commentary, or if it was a group, or the Cambridge Bible, but these three also believe and agree with me, or I agree with them because that came first, that these two responses were by Philip and by the other disciples. They believe, however, that Philip's response came first, and that the response from the disciples, the "shall we spend 200 pennyworth," came later. One of these actually went so far as to say the question to Philip, his response happened, and then some hours later, the disciples just reiterated Philip's question. I really don't think so, because Jesus going up into the mountain comes right before his question to Philip. And I really believe he went up into the mountain to get away, because that was the whole point of him going over the Sea of Galilee, to get away with his disciples. It says privately, aside, apart. And that's why they're in a deserted place. So this question to Philip was after they went into a mountain, and I believe that happened to further get away because there was a crowd when they landed in the boat. They got to the shore, there's a crowd there, he's going to take care of the urgent matter, which is heal their sick, speak to them, preach, teach, and then I really believe he tried to further get away to finally talk with his disciples privately, which would be up in the mountain. And that's how it's stated in John, that they went up into a mountain, and then he asked the question to Philip. So I don't think that when Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw the crowd from the mountain, that was the first time he saw the crowd. If you were going to believe that there are hours separating these two questions, one to Philip and one to the disciples, you'd probably have to believe that all of Jesus' healing and preaching and speaking of the kingdom of God happened during those hours. That he would land, first ask the question to Philip, where are we going to feed them? He responds, then preach, heal, because that's not mentioned in John, so you could put that before the question. Philip went and told the other disciples of this question Jesus asked him. And then hours later, after it says in Matthew and Mark, when the evening came, when the day was far spent, and Luke says, when the day began to wear away, that they came back with their response, which is send them away. I guess because they believed 200 pennyworth was too much, or if it was their whole purse. I mean, if they're going to ask this question now, it would be, no, just send them away. So maybe it's not rude in that manner. But still, I really believe that he got to the shore, and from the shore, from the land, right there is where he's going to immediately heal and preach and speak to the people, and then get away to the mountain, which means that he would ask the question to Philip already in the evening, or after he does all that talking, which would probably be hours later. And then after he asks this question to Philip, then Philip responds. Okay, but to add more detail, I said earlier, I think Jesus' question to Philip was first. Jesus started this conversation because, it says in John, he knows what he was going to do. This is what I think happened now. He asked Philip. He lifted up his eyes, saw the great company. Where shall we buy bread? Now I think that, even though it says he's saying to Philip, I think that the other disciples answered, this is a deserted place. When Jesus asked where, because I said there are two questions asking where, what's the location that we're going to get this food, and are we going to buy it? They're going to respond to the main question, where, by saying this is a deserted place. There's no food here. The reason why I think this answer happens first before Philip is because in Matthew and Luke, it has the response that Jesus gives to this statement, this is a deserted place. Matthew, they need not depart, you give them something to eat. Mark has, you give them to eat. So it really seems that these two statements are tied. The statement from the disciples, this is a deserted place, send the multitude away, and Jesus' response, they need not depart. Those are tied. I don't think there's anything in between these two statements. Send the multitude away, nope, they don't need to depart. I think they happen one and then the other in succession right away. And then after Jesus says, they need not depart, you give them something to eat, it says in Mark now, shall we spend 200 pennyworth for them to buy bread? This question of 200 pennyworth from the disciples, because that is less descriptive than Philip's response, 200 pennyworth is not sufficient. I think this statement from the disciples came first. So because the statement from the disciples, send them away, Jesus' response, they don't need to depart, and then real quick, shall we spend 200 pennyworth? And then, because it's more descriptive, Philip's response, 200 pennyworth is not enough. I think that this first statement from the disciples send them away did come right after Jesus asked the question. And I'm kind of working backwards here. Philip's response is the most descriptive. So probably the disciples' question about 200 pennyworth came just before that. And then because in Mark it has Jesus saying, you give, and then they respond with, shall we spend? Jesus' response, you give, probably happened before that. And because that one's tied with the disciples' statement to send the multitude away, happened before that. I now have it worked backwards to, I believe, Jesus' first question, then they say send away. Jesus says they don't need to depart. The disciples say, shall we spend 200 pennyworth? Then Philip's response to Jesus, most description, 200 pennyworth is not enough. That's how I believe the conversation went. And because of that, I think Jesus' question to Philip is first. And this makes sense because he's setting the groundwork for this conversation. It's like a detective story. He's setting the initial problem. The people are hungry. He gives to them one question, one cryptic question. Where shall we buy food? That's the second one. And that sets up the problem for them. And now they are working through this problem one statement at a time with Jesus and with Philip, and then eventually with Andrew saying that we have 5 loaves and 2 fish to get to the exact answer, which Jesus already knew was going to be the end point of that conversation. We have this food, I'll multiply it. So I wrote that down. 15 steps until they say this is that prophet. The 14th was they gathered 12 basketfuls. I believe it starts with Jesus lifting up his eyes and saw a great company, and then asking Philip, where shall we buy bread? The others first respond. It makes sense when working backwards to have their response happen after Jesus' question. And yes, it may seem rude, but maybe it's just their attempt to answer this conundrum. Where shall we buy the food? They answer the where, saying this is a deserted place. Send them away that they can go into the towns. Then Jesus responds, they need not depart. You give them to eat. So he's buckling down on the money issue. And then they answer the money issue. Shall we spend 200 pennyworth? Whether they had it or not, whether it was sincere or sarcastic, then I believe Philip gets more detailed. 200 pennyworth, even if they had it or not, it's not sufficient. So more description, that comes next. I think that's how the conversation goes.